So the Jose Mourinho versus Paul Pogba episodes continue. James Ducker of the Sunday Telegraph reported on what Paul Pogba had to say. We just heard Mark Pougatch in that piece also. Just, I suppose, putting some light on it, because as far as James is concerned, he said United, according to Pogba, simply do not play on the front foot for nearly as much as they should at home. And asked what is stopping United from doing it, Pogba replied, "I can't tell you because I'm a player. It's not me." Now, is Pogba best served keeping his counsel, or was he provoked? Because after the game, Jose Mourinho spoke how Wolves played in a World Cup final. Like they, and there was only one player of both those sides who played in the World Cup final and flourished, and it was a certain Frenchman.
Yeah, I mean, I think Paul Pogba, if he just hadn't added that last bit in, don't ask me, it would have been fine. He could have said that perhaps we should be attacking more, but the moment he said, "I'm just a player, it's not me," he is then pointing the finger. I think everyone took that to be at Mourinho, and that's the problem there, that now there's been all this talk this season about whether or not there are issues between Paul Pogba and Jose Mourinho. Mourinho's come out and he's backed Paul Pogba, hasn't he, this season? But to say that suggests that something isn't quite right between the pair, I think. Did
it irk him, perhaps, having heard what Jose Mourinho had said?
I think word immediately gets back sometimes when the manager sort of says something, really. And in that kind of short space of time between when the manager speaks and often the players sort of reach us as journalists in the mix zone and sort of stop to have a chat, then basically if the player sometimes has got that in the back of his mind, even if he's not kind of smarting about it and doesn't go into battle, then sometimes it can just slip out. And I think there's clearly a little bit of a simmering undercurrent between these two, isn't there? I mean, Pogba is a wonderful, wonderful player, and I do sympathise with him, to the degree that he's a brilliant beast of a player who loves to drive forward. I love the way that he dominates midfield, but he has also to pick his moments when he says stuff, because it was his clumsiness, his mistake in the build-up to Wolves' equalising goal, and you cannot excuse that. And Mourinho, I think, has probably gone into that press conference himself and been smarting with his player who's given away possession. And it's always so much about kind of Mourinho v Pogba. And Mourinho must be smarting about it. There's no doubt in my mind that Mourinho knows exactly what he's saying when he's bringing up the World Cup final and kind of levels of performance for a World Cup final when Pogba was obviously, stealing the show and being the main man. And that's what's fueled his fire, and that's what's kicked it off again.
You see, I've got to say, that was initially lost on me when he spoke about how Wolves played like it was a World Cup final. I clearly thought he was talking about how they were so much more motivated and that desire that was lacking from his own players. But, that was so pointed, if you think about it now, towards Pogba. I mean, is he right to do so? Do you think he clearly thinks he's going to get reaction back from Pogba, but he wants it on the pitch, not off it?
Yeah, that's Mourinho's style, though, isn't he? Using the press and the media to basically tell some of his star players to up their game. I mean, the good thing for Mourinho is that Pogba's beginning to become a little bit more consistent on the pitch. He's obviously scored a few goals this season, and beginning to really, as you mentioned, dominate midfield and put in those kind of performances where he leads the team. But then, as you mentioned as well, he was at fault in the build-up to Wolves' goal, and I think that's what really is annoying Mourinho, that Pogba's making some of these cryptic comments. He made quite a few now this season about, are we wearing the Manchester United shirt for now, but who knows in the future. Talking all about the fact that perhaps his future doesn't like Manchester United, and then he makes mistakes on the pitch, which is costing United a few points. I think that's what's really annoyed Mourinho, as well as the fact that he feels that for some reason or the other, his team are not showing up, as it were, to every game, or not certainly showing the right attitude in every single game. That's why he said that he was actually happier with the performance from his players against Spurs, despite the fact that they lost 3-0, than against Wolves.
There is this thing about Manchester United and how they haven't exactly covered themselves in glory at home against promoted sides, John. This is something that under Sir Alex Ferguson, and it was quite symbolic that he was present at the game, and it was great to see him looking so well after what happened to him back in May. But under Sir Alex, if there was a promoted side at Old Trafford, they'd be swatted off, with not so much as a second glance. Under Jose Mourinho, particularly in the last couple of years, it seems like a whole different challenge for them.
Yeah, it does really. And I think particularly in Mourinho's first season, if you remember, he had a string of drawn home games when they just couldn't seem to kind of really put the opposition away, no matter who it was. And they really struggled to kind of win those games, and it saw them sort of kind of labour into, you know, a pretty indistinguished sort of first season under Mourinho. Last season, obviously better, you know, they're higher up the league, but still, I just don't feel that fear factor that you used to have at Old Trafford when teams would go there and be half beaten before they were started. Look at, I mean,
that's not bad, but it's the drawn games, isn't it?
It's not bad, but I feel that, for example, I was at the Man United Spurs game. That was such a huge game for United and for Mourinho in particular, and yet actually, you felt that Spurs went there thinking, well, we can get something out of this game because that Old Trafford fear factor is gone, and that's the difference between the Fergie era and what he oversaw. Teams were beaten in the tunnel. They really were. And now under Mourinho, people think, well, we can go there and we can get a result. We can pile the pressure on, because the more pressure that Mourinho is under, the more the opposition think, well, we can go and feed off that pressure and actually add to it ourselves.
Yeah, he certainly wants more from his attacking players. There's no doubt about that. That was the message from Jose Mourinho, wasn't it? And it left us, I suppose, in that kind of cryptic way that you talk about to deduce as to who he was exactly referring to. Alexis Sanchez hasn't quite covered himself in glory since his move from Arsenal. Considering now that he's had his first full pre-season as a United player, he's played 6 full games now, but he hasn't quite hit the notes. I mean, even James Ducker wrote about it, saying, with the headline here, you know, no goals, no spark, no excuses. Alexis Sanchez is simply not justifying his huge salary at Manchester United. He also talks about the bum notes and what his excuses are for that. And he's, of course, alluding to the way that United had unveiled Sanchez on social media by playing the piano to when the Reds go marching on. What is the problem with Sanchez? Why is it not working out for him at the minute?
Well, he had the excuse when he first moved in January, in that he didn't have a full pre-season, obviously, with his new teammates, and he scored, I think it was 3 goals in all competitions up until, obviously, the end of last season. And now he's only created 1 goal, hasn't scored for United, but he has, as you mentioned, had that full pre-season. I'm not sure. He doesn't seem to have settled within that side. It looks lacking in confidence as well. I mean, John, you saw a lot of him, didn't you, at Arsenal?
Yeah.
Do you think he's not kind of being set up enough by some of the players? I know he had Ozil at Arsenal.
Yeah,
to do a lot of that work for him.
It's a really interesting one. I thought that his best time at Arsenal was through the middle, and I thought that's definitely where you got the best out of him. I guess with United, with Lukaku, you're never really going to get that. You know, he's the main man, so it was always going to be a compromise for Sanchez. I also think that part of the issue for me is that basically Sanchez switched off when he was at Arsenal in his final season. I think he lost his way a bit. He was into the final year of his contract, and I think that Arsenal felt, well, we'll keep him because he'll be driven by the fact that he's got the World Cup at the end of it. Obviously, Chile go out the World Cup, and then basically he completely loses his impetus. I don't know whether at that level, when you've got a player like Sanchez who is driven by his passion and commitment on the pitch, if you can turn that on and off, because once you lose that drive, and there's no doubt about it, I think he switched off in his later time at Arsenal, then I don't know how you quite kind of reignite that, because he played with such fire in his belly, and he was just an amazing talent. You never knew when he was beaten, and I just don't see that fire now when he plays for United. Just not getting it. But also I think he's lost in the system a bit. I don't know where he is. I mean, you can't play him, I don't think, on the right side of attack, for example, because you expose the right full-back then, because he will never track back. And you have to find a proper, better position to get the best out of Sanchez. At the moment, he's just completely wasted talent.
It's interesting, just to add there, that actually Paul Pogba was defending him after the game against Wolves, saying actually he showed lots of desire on the training ground, but it's not really translating out onto the pitch at the moment. No,
well, we saw there his statistics in comparison. It's tough in some respects to compare across the board, but the one that stands out is the minutes to goals ratio. It's gone from 168 minutes at Arsenal to 689 at Manchester United. But look, he's come in, and of course it means that the likes of Rashford and Martial now have to be that little bit more patient to get their way into the team. Would you not agree that his arrival has caused more problems than solving them?
Yeah, it shouldn't have done. I can see why they've signed him, because he's an amazing talent. Absolutely. But The other issue is that at Arsenal, he was the main man. He was the big star, basically. He would dominate games, and I think he would love being the centre of attention. He had an ego to match, no doubt about it. And he's gone to United, and it's not quite like that. He is no longer the main man. When you think of Man United, who do you think is their main players? You don't think of Sanchez. I mean, he's had such a kind of forgettable start to the season and the campaign that you almost actually attempted to kind of ignore him from the starting lineup. He's just not worth it at the moment. I don't know quite how you get around this, because they've invested so much money, in the player, in terms of transfer fee and indeed contract. I mean, we just don't know how much he's earning, but you can bet your bottom dollar that I think that the influence was, particularly sort of, just after he left, that Arsene Wenger was hinting that it was in the £700,000 bracket, if you remember that. Well, he's going to be the biggest earner.
Yeah.
And then if he's the underperforming biggest earner, that then creates its own dressing room issue.
Yeah, well, that's within the dressing room now. Never mind future transfer targets.
Absolutely.
Who might well arrive in the future. And interesting you talk about whether Sanchez even features in the next game for United. They don't have to wait long. It's in the EFL Cup. It's a big game, this, actually, in some respects. United up against Derby County of the Championship. And look, who's at the helm of the Rams, no less. It's Frank Lampard, who Jose Mourinho knows so well from his time at Chelsea. Derby, just to, I suppose, let you know, if you've not been across the second tier of English football, they've done OK. They've won 5 of their first 9 games. They're in the playoff places. They're 6th in the Championship as things stand. This is a guy that Mourinho knows more than well. And what is interesting, actually, in the build-up to this, you've called this a must-win game for Jose Mourinho.
Yeah, well, I do think it's a big game for Mourinho, because if you lose this game to Derby, then I do think it heaps more pressure on. Frankly,
the fact that it's at home and after what happened against Wolves?
I just think the big Premier League team is expected to beat the Championship team in this game. And the attention that Lampard going there with Derby, that extra brings, I think is a really interesting sort of kind of dynamic to the story. I actually think that United and Mourinho will probably win this. Mourinho, we shouldn't forget, really puts a lot of faith in the League Cup.
His first competition.
Absolutely, and it's the first competition that he won with Chelsea. He enjoys winning it, clearly, and basically I think that he thinks it's always a winning habit. He's won it subsequently with United, of course, and I just think that he will, unlike some managers who disregard it, Mourinho puts a lot of faith in it, in the competition, and I think he'll go out to win it.
I think the mood could sour quite badly at Old Trafford if they were to lose it. I do expect United to win because of the fact that they dropped points against Wolves and Tottenham at home, the last 2 home games. So it is a key game for United.
This is quite an insight, actually, from Paul Hurst with this headline that Mourinho's approach left a mark on me, says Lampard. This is Frank Lampard, who earlier in the week became a father to a beautiful baby girl, and congratulations to him for that. But he's named her Patricia after his mother, who he lost back in 2008, I think it was, only at the age of 58 due to illness. And he was going through a rocky time at Chelsea at the time, and he remembers very vividly in this interview how Jose Mourinho was there, kept in regular touch, because he was at Inter Milan, and despite being 600 miles away, he was a pillar of support for Frank Lampard. And, that's a side to someone like Jose who we very rarely hear about.
Absolutely. I mean, the people who I've spoken to who know Jose Mourinho personally off the pitch, they all love him. They absolutely love him, and they've got nothing but good things to say about him as a person. That he's charismatic, and he really cares about the players that he has a good bond with. I mean, I remember when he came back to Stamford Bridge for the first time as Manchester United manager, you saw the players who we knew he had a good bond with, like John Terry. They all came up to him, hugged him, and were just like kind of catching up with him. And Lampard has a very good relationship with Mourinho, but this game is huge for Lampard, because if he was to oversee a win at Old Trafford, what would it do for his managerial kind of,
credentials?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a huge game for him, and I think they've been talking about sharing a drink, probably a glass of wine after the game. I'm sure they will. But they've got a very good relationship. He knows Mourinho and Mourinho's sides really well as well. That'll be interesting to see how he sets up his Derby side. Yeah,
it really will be. I mean, I think Frank Lampard is doing a really solid job at Derby. I think we could sort of kind of talk all day, because the Championship, it seems to be such a lottery and a war of attrition sometimes. But I do think he's made a good start. He's been able to attract, good young players through his own connections two derbies. So I think they'll give United a game. I love the respect that Mourinho kind of had from his players, particularly I think from that first spell in charge at Stamford Bridge.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a core there that he used to sort of refer to as kind of his undroppables, didn't he? His special players. And Lampard was absolutely at the centre of that. And I love the way that they respect that. I mean, there's that wonderful clip, isn't there, of Lampard, you know, steaming through the midfield at Bolton, rounding the keeper then to score in front of the away end. As you know, that was the goal that put Chelsea on the march to their first title under Mourinho.
Yeah, it was
They've got special moments between those. And we tend to forget sometimes, as you were rightly pointing out, that Mourinho's got this, he's got this kind of, you know, private side, but he's also, I think, that first spell in charge, and indeed even in the second time back, and sort of the title when he won it then, he's a special manager. And I think sometimes we forget about amongst this feuding and sometimes the fallout.
It does get forgotten, doesn't it?
Absolutely. What an amazing manager he is. There's no doubt about it in my mind, he lost something at Real Madrid. But when at Chelsea in that first time, he was something extraordinary. And he's given Lampard, I think he's played into the Lampard career, because Lampard has got so much extra out of his career, I think, in so many ways, thanks to Jose Mourinho.
Well, a bit like Jose Mourinho, Arsenal's new manager, Unai Emery, is looking to certainly make an impression in his first season in charge of English football, and he's not doing a bad job of it. 5 wins now in a row in all competitions. It's only something that Arsene Wenger did 3 times in his last 36 months in charge. So it's not something to be sniffed at. They, of course, were winners over Arsenal at the Emirates Stadium. Decent celebration as well by Aubameyang in the process. Whether that goal should have stood is something entirely different. But look, it was the first clean sheet as far as the Gunners are concerned. And for Petr Cech, you were very quick to take to social media to defend the 36-year-old because he had one of his better games this season.
Well, I think he's arguably been Arsenal's best player this season. And I think the stick that he's come in for on occasion, largely because of distribution, has been ridiculous. Completely over the top, and I aim that at sort of kind of not just kind of people on social media or fans or whatever, but members of my own profession, because I think his run of form at the start of this season as a goalkeeper has been amongst his best performances since he joined Arsenal, 3 and a bit years ago. It's been absolutely exceptional. He really has been. He's been, I mean, on Sunday, honestly, 6 sensational saves. I would say 3, you know, brilliant one-on-one chances for Everton, all denied by Cech. Absolutely fantastic, out of this world. And it's like, you know, a couple of weeks ago when Arsenal won at Newcastle, people picking up on a Cech misplaced pass, which went out into touch at Newcastle, as if it was a new world crisis. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And I feel a bit sorry for him, really, because even in the press conference, you know, on Sunday, someone asked third question, how do you think that Bernd Leno will feel about now Petr Cech is kind of the established number one? Well, frankly, who cares? I mean, Cech has just had a brilliant game, and people, you know, in the media are talking about Leno as if that's any relevance. Cech is the number one. Cech should be afforded a little bit of time and patience to overcome the teething problems. It's not just him, by the way, that's being asked to play in a different way and play out from the back. And Cech has been Arsenal's best player, in my view, this season.
Is that not almost inevitable, though, considering that Arsenal has spent the most they ever have done on a goalkeeper just merely waiting in the wings?
I think, yeah, you can understand why people are kind of questioning. Well, Bernd Leno came out, actually spoke to Evening Standard actually last week, and he was speaking about the fact that he thinks he's good enough to be playing every game. But then he did admit after the Europa League game that perhaps he needs a little bit of time to settle into things. Obviously, a new club, a new country. Of course, the thing about Leno is he's already used to playing the kind of style of football that Unai Emery wants, which is playing out from the back. But as I completely agree with you, John. Like, you know, Cech, he pulled off a string of impressive saves against Everton. It was always going to take time, wasn't it, for him to kind of get used to this new sort of playing style. It was also going to take time for the rest of the team to get used to it. And I do think that goalkeepers do attract unfair criticism. Of course, it's always easy to point out when Cech makes a mistake, or, you know, against City. Do you remember? I mean, I was at the game. I think you were, of course, John, when he nearly scored that comical goal. But, you know, it's highlighted because he's a goalkeeper, whereas if a midfielder makes a mistake like that, it's not always highlighted as much. But he's been very impressive in what is his final season at Arsenal, unless he signs, obviously, a new deal.
Yeah.
You know, he's taken on this challenge. The fact that they've signed a new goalkeeper. He's got that competition as well, staring at him in the face, and he's taken on this challenge really well, I think.
Yeah, and I talk about how now Arsenal have won 5 games in a row. So, you know, I suppose as you'd expect, as a result of that, the widespread reporting of Arsenal has been pretty much positive. Also on Petr Cech, you'll be glad to hear, John. But also there's been one dose of reality that's been served up here from Jason Steinberg here, Jacob Steinberg from The Times. Now, this is basically says, you know, his article summed up in a couple of sentences. Lacazette was set to be subbed before scoring. Aubameyang's goal was offside. It masked over the cracks. He says predictable phases of play, and there was a lack of inspiration. Aubameyang looked uncomfortable on the left wing. Ozil just as unhappy on the right. There are still, I suppose, a few questions to be answered despite this current good run.
Yeah,
it's not convincing as of yet.
I don't think so. I always thought it would take Unai Emery, who is, I think, making a decent, solid start, and which is all Arsenal fans could want.
Yeah.
But I think it's all about finding that balance of the team. I think that sort of, you know, if you look apart, you know, look and pull it apart really, the sort of the centre halves, are they sort of well suited to playing a very high defensive line? Arguably not, because, you know, haven't got the pace of recovery. Has he found the kind of the right midfield axis yet? Well, I think he has part of it with Torreira, but he needs to find the sort of the combination that works alongside him. Is there a place for Ramsey? I think there has to be, because he's such a good, solid and consistent performer for Arsenal. But does that impact upon Ozil? You know, Aubameyang and Lacazette, everyone says you've got to play them both well. Some games it works, sometimes it doesn't, because they are both out-and-out strikers. And to try and play one on the wing to squeeze the other.
Mkhitaryan in there as well.
Absolutely. There's loads of issues that you can see in the performances. Now, the really impressive part, I think, about Unai Emery and what Arsenal did on Sunday was that despite being a long way short of perfection, a long way, still got the result. And to win 2-0 when you're not playing well, when there's a lot of work to be done against a really solid side like Everton, who've, you know, improved under Silva, no question, I think has got to be a really good sign.
Well, James Gearbrandt of The Times writes about that new pivot in midfield. So Granit Xhaka is often seen as, I suppose, the questionable inclusion. Should he be there? Should it be Guendouzi? Should it be El Neni? But I suppose the first Premier League start for Lucas Torreira was seen as most welcome, if not most overdue. Did we see a glimpse of the future?
Yeah, absolutely. He's a tough tackling midfielder.
Yeah, as
He's
we
exactly
saw for Uruguay.
Absolutely, and that's kind of the midfielder that a lot of Arsenal fans have been crying out for years and years. I think, you know, it was great to see him obviously play, but I think that the question is really what, John, you've mentioned, is who plays alongside him. Guendouzi, perhaps, is it too much too soon? He's certainly showed what he can do, but then Xhaka...
But he's raw, isn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. He's young. I think, was he 19? So he's quite young. He's still got some way to go to really sort of fit into the style and get used to things. But good to see him playing. It's just really a question about who plays alongside him now.
Who should it be?
I think it has to be Guendouzi right now. I don't know whether you can get Ramsey to sort of be a bit more disciplined and play deeper, because I still think he's irresistible in an Arsenal team, because he will always get goals and contribute. But for me, Xhaka, I just don't get it. I thought that when basically Emery came in, particularly as basically he obviously made a beeline to sign him up to a new contract. One of the first things he did was give him a 5-year deal. I just thought he's got to have more. I've got to show more and got to give more to the team. And it was games like Sunday that sort of kind of frustrate me. I just don't think at the moment, when he plays like that, he's worth his place in the team. But it almost feels like Xhaka's the mainstay and everyone else is, you know, alongside him. Whereas I think it has to be Torreira is the mainstay, and then find your partner. And I think on the balance of form this season, it should be Torreira and Guendouzi.
I'll tell you what, in this piece, actually, James is quite effusive of his praise of Lucas Torreira. I mean, he says that he is the first authentic defensive midfielder Arsenal have had in place since Gilberto Silva. Would you go along with that?
Yeah, I would. It's been a long time coming for Arsenal, because in the
there's been a few duds along the way, haven't
absolutely. They tried to sign, you know, players, and you know, Wenger kind of thought he knew better than the rest of us, and basically didn't want to sign Kante because he thought that he was a bit too restrictive, a bit too defensive. Well, that's what they were crying out for, and he went for Xhaka because he's box to box instead. I mean, it's just, you know, so it has been a sort of a frustrating time. But I think Gilberto and Patrick Vieira anchored that midfield to perfection, you know, for the Invincibles even. And I love the way that Torreira was so determined. It was a brilliant moment in the game. Torreira was restricted, no doubt about it. He got an early booking,
Yes.
so he couldn't
Had to
quite do
rein
what,
it in a bit, yeah.
But basically, there was a moment in the first half, and he did something similar actually in the World Cup. But basically, he lost the ball, and he had to go chasing after it, and then he was kind of knocked to the floor, and he actually threw his body in the line of the ball because he couldn't reach it with his foot. That's how committed he is, and that's why Arsenal fans will absolutely love this player.
Phil Jones-esque. OK, time for another break on the programme. And when we come back, we'll breeze you through the rest of the stories that are currently making the headlines as we hear Ilkay Gundogan's thoughts on how Manchester City can retain their Premier League crown.